Ryan, thanks again for joining us and thank you for your presentation at the Performance MDT. We really appreciate your time and coming back to answer some of these questions. For those people that weren't able to watch your presentation live, can you just give a brief summary of what you were talking about, please?
Yeah, so no, thanks again, Steve. But no, basically, my talk was just about how we can just do things better with the information that we have. So obviously, looking at our rugby training and just saying like, can we do things in a better format to kind of get more than what we want? Obviously, in elite sport, we're very time precious anyway. So it's just understanding how we can get a better physical adaptation or perhaps a better physical response to our training to ensure that basically we can improve our methods, to improve our athletes in a situation where we don't have as much time. So one of the examples I gave was just reordering our drills to make sure that it mimicked something that's a little bit more like the game, as opposed to something that is not like the game, whereby we go quite contact dominant and then quite running dominant. But by going sort of contact running, that seems to simulate the game a little bit better. We have a better physiological response. So as a result, perhaps we are training closer to the demands of rugby union. And that's just one example of how we can just, without changing anything else, just reordering the drills, we can just make a massive difference to how we prepare our players.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ryan. So, a handful of questions to get through from people that were messaging on the day and also on Twitter. So, thank you again to everyone that sent them through. So, question one: do you monitor and program contact loads in the week? And the second part of the question is: do you work off worst case scenarios, etc.?
Yeah. So the first part of that, yes, we do. We do try to monitor our contact loads in the week. So obviously, only recently you can actually kind of do that, and we've done some of that work through my PhD studies where we can monitor the contact loads. But even for those that can't, you understand what your high contact drills are and what your low contact drills are. So you kind of get a feel instinctively before you use any technology as to how much contact you're doing in a total week, whether that just be through time or through the sort of intensity of a drill, just visually. But we'll use the numbers that we have to understand how much contact players doing in a week. So, and then we'll kind of gauge that then based on very, very similar to how it works with acute chronic ratios. We're just understanding what a player needs to go through. So again, they're paid for contact. They're not underdone going into the weekend, because even though we kind of talk about contact load from an injury perspective, it's definitely for a skill perspective as well, that you do need to practice contact. So essentially, we'll then take that information. We know what they're doing in a working week, and then we can put that in then to make sure they know that we've still got enough room then to kind of do what they need to do on a Saturday. As far as the worst case scenarios, yeah, there's ways and forms that we can kind of do that. All we need to know is that we can kind of touch those worst case scenarios. Perhaps we don't do it necessarily by doing bone on bone tackling. There's other ways that we can do it. So whether that be through our methods where we use power endurance, where you're looking at bag slams and various things like that, so you can get a different way of contact load. But essentially what we're trying to do is just say, look, we can take them up to that tolerance of where that worst case scenario is. But again, we just want to make sure that we revisit that, not all the time, but frequently enough that if we're in a situation whereby when we played against Ireland a few years ago and we had to defend 30 odd phases, if we need to go to that, we know that we can go there and survive there. But also that's something that doesn't come around very often. So therefore we know that that's an extreme. So we know that we sort of just address it with the players that we know we can go there, but let's stay with what we're expecting, but we know that we can kind of go higher if we need to.
Thank you very much, Ryan. It seems that everyone loves a double barrel question for you, because number two is a double barrel one as well. So, how have you found the progression of your own practice over the 10 years you've been at WRU? How have you kept changing and improving the provision you provide to the players?
Good question. Progression in my own practice over the last 10 years. So probably different people have had quite a big influence on my journey in the last 10 years. So initially starting when I was first started was with Craig White. So he was there for the first probably year or two that I was at Welsh Tribune, and I learned a lot off him about how to be holistic, etc., and appreciating the whole sort of machine that is physical performance and what goes into that. Second person then was Adam Beard. So Adam was with us for until 2015. So I learned a lot off Adam, and he directed me and guided me. It was kind of what to do and what to look at. And then finally, then under Paul Stridgen, he's kind of been brilliant in letting me kind of follow through with any ideas that I've had. So it's probably, in a way, I'd say it's a path of a perfect storm in some respects, of whereby I've kind of, over time, my knowledge has grown so people can trust me, but at the same time, I've had the right people steer me in perhaps the early stages of my career to now, whereby people are trusting me to kind of crack on and go with my gut and follow things through. So that's kind of like how I've kind of done it. And you know, alongside of that, alongside with my PhD, is obviously Tim Gabbett as well, who again has had a huge influence on me and how you look at things and how you know, research and study, and you know, having that element of putting that research into practice as well. So between the four of them, it's sort of been quite a big, they've had quite a big influence. So then how I kind of kept evolving that and improving on the players. Again, that's kind of goes hand in hand with the job. So when I first started, we probably had 20 GPS devices. So you couldn't even cover a whole team. Whereas now we're up to 320 something, and we can now provide for all the regions. So we cover national squad, under 20s, under 18s, sevens, women's. Our four regional teams are the Dragons, Blues, Ospreys and Scarlets, and the regional academies within that as well. So in a way we've had to change, but then the investment that we've had off the union to be able to go and do that is off the back of the solid, I think, the good work that we've done of not only hopefully being what we think is one of the fittest teams, if not the fittest team in world rugby, that they can continue that investment into us being at the forefront. So I've been pretty lucky in that perspective, but at the same time, it's the work that's kind of gone into them to make sure that they trust me to deliver on those investments. So what we just try to do is one thing that probably one of the biggest turning points was probably 4 years ago, and that's probably one of the strengths of our program now, is that we have a fully integrated program. So everything across all four club teams, or across every team that we service, between me and Kieran Miller, is that we everything is done exactly the same. So if a player were to come through the pathway, etc., the data, the metrics, the numbers that we're looking at are identical throughout the whole way. So when we're comparing players, or even if we're comparing a player from region to region, everything is identical. The data that we're getting is identical. So we're in a good position that we can compare, but also then when we feed that information back to clubs, so if we exchange data between teams, etc., they all know that we're on the same path as well, that they understand what data they're looking at. We haven't got teams that are looking at different metrics, or it's up to them what they perceive as important, but at the same time they're looking at the same numbers that are done in exactly the same way. It's very standardized. So that's probably been one of the biggest sort of evolutions. That's why there's a lot of countries now that are kind of going into that process as well, by having everything into as a one coming from a top down approach then. You're frozen, Steve. Yeah.
So apologies about that.
Sorry, do you catch the end of that then?
Yeah, like I think Mrs. must be playing the video downstairs, unfortunately.
But no, so if you need me to redo any of that, or
it's not. So as long as your internet was fine, it uploads fine. It's like it just I probably go like that.
Yeah.
So, but no one's worried about me. So there's two more questions just to get through.
Yeah.
For those not working in rugby, how would you say the training differs to other sports, and what lessons can we take from your experience of rugby union?
So, look, I think to the way that training can differ in other sports, obviously, if you're looking at team sports specifically, um, like if you look at some of the sort of diagrams people have done of where sort of the demands, whether you're looking at strength, speed, endurance, you just put those three and you can kind of see where your sport fits in to all of that. Now, probably largely, I think a lot of team sports, if you look at rugby, football, etc., AFL, we're not a million miles off one another, but obviously we still are because some are contact sports, some aren't. So obviously some things have to go into the way that you kind of prepare your players and what you'd expect to do and not do in a certain week. That will obviously change. But I think in essence is, there's still a lot of physical qualities that are probably not that dissimilar either. But I think, for me, I kind of think of it, if you were to put on a continuum that you had sort of a Usain Bolt on one end and a Mo Farah on the other end, and you put all the team sports together, again, like I say, I don't think we're not a million miles apart. So there's a lot of things that we can kind of take from one another. And I think people it's very easy when you're working in your own silo or you're working within your own sport to kind of think that your sport is very unique, etc. But, really it's not as different as what you kind of perhaps think it is in comparison to some of the other team sports. So like probably some of the lessons that you can take from rugby union, for example, like just the one in the presentation really with regards to how you reorder your sessions, etc. I think that's something which I haven't done much work and I haven't seen a lot of work, for example, in football, but I can imagine that working quite well, and that you go from some sort of drills which are perhaps high accel, decel heavy into perhaps something that is more distance and perhaps will be more valued for meters per minute, etc. But instead of having how you balance those two together, I think would have a different physiological outcome for that session as opposed to if you stack them all at the front and put all your sort of more running drills at the back. So I definitely think that there's a lot of experiences that you can kind of translate across. But then also then for, if you're working in sort of America football, the contact load that we've had, again, that's something that we can take forward and I think could easily be translatable into those sort of sports as well, whereby you are looking at how you can do repeated collisions. Okay, I know they have those sort of rest periods in the team, but you're going in for those short, high intensity periods. But again, I haven't seen too many American football teams train, but you can see ways there that how you change the drills and how you can evolve the drills, how you can just make them more challenging from a decision-making point of view, how you incorporate that technical and tactical element for it, but then also how you can enhance that physical element as well. So you can get more out of your training and make it more applicable to what players will face on a Sunday. So yeah, there's a couple of lessons there that I think that are definitely transferable in the essence of where we come from in rugby union to any other team sport, really.
Great, thank you. And the last one, and probably on the back of that last question as well, how do you combine the workload done in the gym to the work you do out on the training pitch?
Again, it's a good question, but to some extent, it's difficult. You have to draw the line somewhere. And that's probably going to sound, I think some people might disagree with that. Because you could easily, obviously, you could track tonnage in the gym just by looking at sets and reps and the weight. And then also then you could look at, obviously, RPE as well for how hard they rated the sessions. Although, it's a different aspect as to kind of whether you're doing power, strength, etc. They're all going to have completely different responses. And also on the athlete, depending on what type of athlete they are, they're going to have different responses. So I think what we've tried to do is try to track the main lifts, the key lifts, the ones that we think that matter. Obviously, a couple of players, they like to do some cheeky beach weights, so that's not a problem. But the argument is that sometimes they might be doing those sort of things away from us anyway. That's fine. That's not for us to sort of decide upon. That's up to them on how they feel whether they should do it or not. So, but then obviously, if you want to track everything, then all of a sudden, then you have to track. Perhaps you should be tracking the bits that they do in the evening, but obviously that's impossible, and you've got to look at the relationships that you're having with your players. So overall, I wouldn't necessarily try to track everything. I just try to make sure that you're combining what you think is the key lifts. What are the key exercises that are high, like the high stress, basically on players, and taking that forward then into how you kind of look at that and combine that then with what you know on the field, and just kind of being sort of quite pragmatic about it with that. I wouldn't necessarily get too bogged down into recording every single lift and all time, unless someone's doing something that's completely excessive, then it's different. But I wouldn't, I wouldn't get too bogged down in trying to combine too much of the workload. But I would make sure that you do have a handle on it, and you know when you are doing more than normal or you're doing less than normal. But largely, a lot of those will come from the key lifts in the sense of whether because they're the ones which carry the most weight and will have the biggest effect if you do track tonnage. So yeah, just try to keep it as simple as you can, because the simplicity of the data of pulling it all through is what's key, rather than having too much information and not being able to pull it all together.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ryan. And if anyone's got any other questions for you, what's the best way for them to contact you, please?
Probably either on Twitter, which I think is Ryan Chambers 13, or rchambers@wiu.wales.